and we've begun. So as you can see up on top up there, the when I say virtual Friday, I mean it's very hard to figure out who's going to be here and when. I'll probably do one recording. If I'm going to be on at exactly 9 o'clock, like I'll give you a 15-minute heads up in case you want to log in. We have that site that I sent you the information. So if you don't recall it, I will send it again to everybody. I'll just copy and paste it if you want to log in. But I'm not sure when I'm going to be on. It might be at 9, might be at 10, whatever. I don't know what your other class schedule is. So we'll figure it out. And then when we return on Monday, after the break, then we will continue on from there. There's a lot of information to cover, but it's somewhat, I looked at the exam, the final, and it's somewhat haphazard. In the sense that I look at my own exam and try to figure out, for whatever reason, we're a little bit more limited on time this term than previously, probably because of just the way I've been doing it, I think. So, and I do want to do the autonomic nervous system when we get back, so I'll dedicate those, because we theoretically have 4 classes, but I would like to leave the Monday, yeah, effectively we have that is a class day, the Monday of exam week, if I didn't say that before, but it is. So if I was hoping to do that just for some review for everybody's here, so hopefully I don't need it for teaching purposes. We'll just have to see. Let me get the important part out of the way. I was 2/3 pleased with the exams. Did you see the exam grades? Did you guys all? Okay. So I have trouble with that. Making sure they get posted. So, I mean, if you add up the 3 grades, if you're satisfied with what the average of those 3 grades is, then just send me a slip that you're not planning to take the final. An email will do, or you can ask me specifically what the grade is or what I need. Like if you've got a B, how hard is it to get a B plus? If you have just a B minus, how hard is it to go to a B? That type of stuff. I'll be glad to give you an idea of what that would take. So just do that by email. We'll have plenty of time for that, given the amount of time it's on. About 1/3 of the grades I wasn't, and there were people who needed to improve who I felt didn't improve. And I mean, that whole AI thing, I mean, I thought that was very helpful because I think it did help a lot of people who were there. I mean, it's a function of studying, and in general, why am I telling you guys? Because most of you guys weren't the ones I should be talking to, but we know how that goes on. We're going to have a last chance saloon. Do you know what a last chance saloon is? That's right. I'll do it for everybody, not just for this class. I was thinking of just doing it for this class and not telling anybody else. Why am I one of these? This is a 2-edged sword. 2 hours to take that. Everybody, can you give us an open book time? Reality is, it's harder because you have too much information. Don't study. What's an open book? I'll just do it when I get on my phone and look for the answers. No phone. As a matter of fact, you can use it. It's open book. I don't care if you have your computer. We'll make it fun. For those who are taking the final. I mean, I don't want to bomb you. I realize a lot of people have to get that B minus to move on, particularly if they're in nursing, or to see if they're in health sciences. So I'm trying to help you. So it'll be open book. I'll just verbalize it. If you're listening to people who need it, it's okay. For whatever reason, this came upon me today, knowing this is my last day until a week from Monday. I'm not coming out Friday. I'm old. I'll plead age and infirmity. So you understand the key to doing open book finals is to study ahead of time, organize your material so you know where it is, rather than sitting there on the phone and trying to keep Googling every answer or AIing every answer. It doesn't always work because either way I phrase the questions doesn't necessarily lead it to that. So people who are desperate, don't blank it up. You know what I mean? Not to be critical. So much for the Sermon on the Mount today. And we move on. All right, that's what I mean. Part of the reason I did this, there's a lot of material to cover, and I have to jump around. I'll probably do this. The spinal cord's a little hard. It's not a long presentation. I'm sure I will do that on Friday because you really did. And that's more of an anatomy presentation. And so this, I'm trying to. I looked at the exam and trying to hit the areas that are important. So, voila. So some of this I know you had ventricles. The ventricles. Remember what the brain is. It starts as a hollow tube filled with fluid. The fluid in the tube is the cerebrospinal fluid. There are places where it leaks out. Leak is the wrong term, where it's designed to leak out and basically surround but so it's in the middle, so it's floating because it's got fluid in the middle. It's a fluid filled thing, like you blow up a small raft, or we have a blow upable kayak. And on top of it, to make it even more cushion, there's fluid that goes on the outside. We may or may not get to the meningeal layers today. That's where the fluid is, on the outside. Okay? So, but what's happened as they've developed these ventricles, the brain is widened, twisted, enlarged in certain areas, narrowed in certain areas, all of those things during the course of human development. So this is where the fluid are, and we've named these chambers ventricles. Okay. So that's where the cerebrospinal fluid, by and large, is produced there. And again, it's not so much produced as it is extracted or taken from plasma in the bloodstream and finalized. Okay. And I'm phrasing that specifically. And remember, those are those ependymal cells line it. There's a thing called choroid plexes that you will see as we get to that part of the presentation, possibly not today. So you have these ventricles. So if we go back and look at them, and there's the ependymal cells and all that good stuff, I think I went too far. Fluid-filled chambers lined by ependymal cells. These two big ones, because the largest part is the cerebral hemispheres, they look like a C with a tail, and there's a fancy structure that separates them called the septum pellucidum. Okay, and it's almost like a tiny membrane. I even think that the fluid can flow between them. And then, so that's the one that's associated with the cerebral hemispheres and the basal nuclei, all in those chambers. The third ventricle is around the diencephalon. That's the thalamus, epithalamus, and hypothalamus area. And the fourth ventricle is in between the brainstem and the cerebellum back. I'll show you the illustrations in a bit, just talking about it now. That one's really important, okay? It's open, and you're going to learn that the subarachnoid space is where you should note that now, where the cerebrospinal fluid is that surrounds the central nervous system on its exterior. And we'll talk about the names of these places. Down the road, we look at the meningeal layers. It has two openings in the side called lateral aperture. An aperture is an opening, okay? And median, meaning in the midline. So that's where the fluid escapes. The fluid, as you will see, can even go all the way down to the very tip of the spinal cord because it's always filled with fluid in the middle of the central nervous system. That's called the central canal. So here's what we're looking at. This is that neat sort of letter C shape. It's one giant chamber with a tiny membrane in between them. And you can see it's sort of with the brain development: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe. It has a little opening here at the continuation of probably what was the original hollow chamber. They give it a name, interventricular foramen, and now you have the one that surrounds the diencephalon. That's why it's important to know those regions that I talked about a little bit before we had the exam, like last Friday. And then you have another one they call the cerebral aqueduct. Aqueduct is just a water passageway. Remember, a lot of this was, ancient Rome. They built aqueducts. They had their own interesting plumbing system. A little history won't hurt you. Okay. And now you can see here's the fourth ventricle. It's laying over here. That one's really significant because it's between the brainstem and the cerebellum, and because of the openings that allow it to escape and kind of surround the central nervous system there. But it also can go all the way to the bottom of the spinal cord, and also there's an exit point. And we're constantly making it and constantly absorbing it. It's about a half a liter a day, roughly, a pint. So the hemispheres, this is anatomy. I'm not going to go into it crazy again like that. You learned about gyri and sulci in lab, correct? Yeah. The longitudinal fissure right under that side. Got it. Great. Remember that squamous suture that's right around that transverse. I mean, not the transverse cerebral fissure. That's cerebrum and cerebellum. But we'll get into it. And I'm not going to go crazy with all that. That lateral sulcus is really sort of along that squamous suture. That's what I was referring to. All you got to know for these guys is basically what they do. Frontal lobe, like motor, language, judgment, etc. Parietal, pure sensory, occipital vision, temporal, major part auditory. You might have seen this on the dissection. I mean, you may not have. The brainstem is relatively small. Cerebellum is the second largest layer. It's there. There's the divides, did all that. Don't want to do it again. Nice looking at it. And they always did. The big player is here. On the sheep, you don't see it. On the human brain, it's a little bit more distinctive. We don't have a human brain here, unfortunately, to look at. It's called the central sulcus. It is the divide, okay? Motor, this is called the precentral gyrus. That's the primary motor gyrus. That's where your brain literally says, grab this. How we're going to grab it is sort of a planning. It goes as we get farther back. This is planning to move it. This is the instructions. Move that. The post-central gyrus is called the primary sensory gyrus. That's where you actually felt somebody stepping on your foot. That kind of stuff. So when you reached out and grabbed somebody, something was sharp or hot, boom, and did this, that's where you actually felt it. So primary motor commands come from the pre-central. Pre means before. Primary sensory input, post-central. And now we take that and we process it. Okay, I felt that. What does that mean? Pan's hot. Can I grab it again and see if it's still hot? No! You know, that you get the idea, that type of stuff. I thought that was clever. And you can see they always use and they use different shades of whatever bluish color this is. I don't do shades. It's like lipstick, coral. It's freaking pink. I don't know, orange. It's like salmon. Salmon's a fish, not a color. It's a guy thing. Major, yeah. The whole idea, when you're looking at cortex, is only in two areas: external gray, highest order processing, cerebrum and cerebellum. Then there's white matter, and then we talked about it, the basal nuclei. I don't know if you saw them on the dissection. They're sort of hidden deep inside the lateral ventricle, and these are islands of gray matter. Those are the ones that sort of give the fine control over those motor commands, you might recall me saying. And you're going to see these illustrations a lot in this presentation and when you review it. And here's what it does. Cerebral cortex, everything. Mind, awareness, it's relatively thin. Okay, cell bodies, dendrites, synapses, glial cells, no axons. That's white matter, but it's very heavy comparatively, 40% of the mass. So that, from a weight perspective, that's there. And what they did, they used specialized scanning techniques to look at different areas and what they did. So when it lights up with red, basically, remember the brain only uses one energy source, glucose. They tag the glucose in such a way that when they do this scan, it's got a fancy name called a PET scan. It shows up. So when you're thinking, hopefully you're using everything. When you're speaking, this is a fancy name area. I'm not going to put on the test. It's called Broca's area. If you do more advanced, if you go into a clinical field like nursing or rehab, you're going to deal with stroke patients. Stroke patients have difficulty communicating to you. It's very frustrating. It's got a fancy name. It's called aphasia, and it comes from this area. You look outside. Is it cloudy today? And they're struggling. They know it's cloudy. They just can't get it out, and it doesn't necessarily help to get a pad and a pencil to write it down because it's hard. We call it an expressive deficit. The fancy word is aphasia, APHASIA. Okay. Sometimes the stroke is farther back here in this area, and basically they can speak just fine, but we call that a receptive aphasia. They'll try to guess the answer. They'll say, look out, you'll go, oh, is it a cloudy day? You go, yeah, I know today's Tuesday. That type of thing. Perfectly formed. It's a very unique thing when you're dealing with stroke patients. So and that has a fancy name that's called Wernicke's area. So I'm saving you some extra names. But I'm saving them for you, but you're going to see them probably down the road. And again, seeing occipital, etc. And so this is kind of what goes on without going crazy. So we have motor, we have sensory, and the vast amount of association. By and large, it's opposite sides. Remember, the cerebellum, same side. Cerebellum, ipsilateral motor coordination. Coordinating when I move, all the things I have to do to move and grab the bottle. And it just keeps memorizing and putting that information down for future reference. Okay? And again, lateralization means the fact that when I did this, it was the left side of my brain. And we get into left-handedness and right-handedness. And these are some of the parts that are here. I'm not going to go over all of those. I'm going to try to make sure that I adjust the exam so it doesn't go. Right now, there's too much information. Here are those areas. You see this illustration a lot. And so with my advanced class, and we did this unit already, we go into, this is the planning area. This is where you begin to, what did I just feel area, and how do I respond to it? Here are those areas that I highlighted, Broca's and Wernicke's, just for things like this. The most interesting area is this, okay? In and around this area, we call it the prefrontal cortex. If you have not done so, and I know it's 50 years old, so you can find it on any app platform for free with the commercials. It's called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. If you have not seen that movie, do yourself a favor when you have a little break and nothing else is happening over the holiday week. Watch it. So it's won every kind of a cat: best picture, best writing, best direction, best actor, best actress, da 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 da. Brilliant. It's all about what they used to do called the prefrontal lobotomy. For people they felt were criminally insane, they couldn't correct. They said, oh, it's here. This is where the bad stuff comes from. And basically, they took away that part of their brain and became walking zombies. Really, almost, just take them to the bathroom, take them back to bed, sit them in a chair, nothing else. And it's a story about what insane asylums, and particularly the criminally insane, were like back in the 50s. It was taken from a stage play that was very interesting. Michael Douglas put it all together. He didn't direct it. Milos Forman directed it. Jack Nicholson, first Academy Award. The late Louise Fletcher, her Academy Award. Brilliant. That's the term. You ever heard the term Nurse Ratched? She was Nurse Ratched. This evil nurse who was just trying to push these people. And my favorite character in there was a guy named Brad Dourif. It was the first time we saw Danny DeVito. Brad Dourif is a brilliant little character actor. Always does very unusual stuff. He's a nice Southern gentleman, but he's kind of offbeat. If nothing else from me, you should have developed a certain degree of affection for old movies. We saw the new, whatever it is, Jurassic Park movie last night. That was okay. So many dinosaurs, so little time. Love it. Okay. Don't go to the movies. So I'm not going to get into the pyramidal cells and the corticospinal tracts. These are, if you remember on the medulla, did Dr. Robbins talk about what's called pyramids? Those are mounds on the anterior aspect of the medulla oblongata. When I do this, the motor, the primary thing is called the corticospinal tracts. They make up those pyramids, those mounds on either side of the anterior pons. That's the main passageway for your mind telling your body what to move. Okay, and so, and the reason I want to incorporate this a little bit, just so you have some context, when you hear about all these people who have the shakes, Parkinson's, all the other tracks kind of control, motor tracks control that movement, so it's nice and smooth and effortless. So when you're in pharmacy and they talk about extrapyramidal symptoms, a lot of the side effects of medications give you that, particularly psychological, psychiatric, neurological medication. They give you the shakes. And it'll say, oh, extrapyramidal side effects. You will now know something that can impress your pharmacology instructor. And you don't even have to tell them I gave you that. There's no extra charge for this whatsoever. I love this. Okay. This basically, those are called, it's got a fancy name, they're called homunculi. And basically, we've mapped out sensory and motor, what part, where they're triggered on those two gyri, the primary motor and primary sensory one. So what this tells you, ladies and gentlemen, how do we interact with the world? Facially, upper extremity. We use the lower extremity to get around. Okay? That tells you where all the circuitry is. How do we receive from the world? Again, facially, bring stuff we bring in, we eat, we drink, what we feel, a little bit with our torso, a little bit with our, a lot with our lower extremity there, because of all those sensors in the foot. Remember, we talked about that a little bit. That's why there's not a lot of sensors for the insides. And that's why the next time somebody has a stomach ache, ask them to point where it hurts. The next 10 people will all point here, 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 all be different. Because we get a non-specific signal, you got a stomach ache. And they're pointing to their small intestine or large intestine or appendix, whatever. That's because there's not a lot of sensors. That's how you read this. Okay. So this is what I mean. You can look through these. They're fairly self-explanatory. This is planning and staging. Okay, here's that Broca's area. They say only speech, it really isn't. It's almost always on the left, even for left-handed people. And then as we look at, I mean, and you see a lot of these views, and I don't want to go over all this because it's too much information, frankly. That's there. So this is the idea of a stroke. Paralysis occurs on the opposite side of the body. When those cells are damaged, the ones in the corticospinal tract from your brain going to your muscles, what happens is when they start to work again, the only signal they have is stimulate. So we see something called spastic hemiplegia. People with a stroke, every flexors always overpower extensors. So we see them like this, with contractions in their leg here. We're bracing them because if you don't do something about it, it's very hard to rehabilitate. So the foot, we use a right angle stop brace because they'll develop basically a toe drag, foot that points down, called foot drop. Same thing here. We try to make sure we keep them in a neutral attitude, brace here and here, hold this here, and basically at least you have a starting point for rehabilitation. That's a lot of, I've got so many students in health, the allied health careers looking at physical therapy. That's a big part of your job. For nursing, it's a big part of your job. Why do I have to be in this? You got questions you can answer. Okay. So, okay. Again, you have to relearn how to do a lot of things that are there. And they're giving you some good examples. And so it's just a useful read through. Sensory, all these names that are there, all the other lobes are involved in some amount of sensation. Things that I think are important, proprioceptors, those little things that are everywhere. Every nerve, every month, they have little things that tell us, is it contracted? Am I standing? Am I sitting? Etc. All of those types of things that are there. And again, they show you the same illustration. And basically, we go along. I mean, think, if I close my eyes, do I know I'm grabbing that plastic bottle or this marker? You know right away. But this is how your body does it. It takes the texture, the size, the amount. Is it smooth? Is it rough? Or is it regular? I do this. I find this a lot with the dog when he leaves me a surprise. It's a very surprising dog. And it's a big dog, so it's very often a big surprise. I should be offering extra credit to clean up all the leaves. Effing leaves in my life. My whole yard. We have 2 giant oak trees that have been there. It cost thousands to remove. Acorns, freaking. Just a big sign the squirrels put up. Party at our house. Moving on. Visual areas. I don't ask you the name. Another one of those names that you see a lot on licensure exams, competency exams, called the calcar and sulcus. That's kind of like where vision's supposed to be. And we associate it. I mean, it's like I now am beginning to know some of your names. Okay, but your faces I got pretty well down. So when I see somebody walk up the stairs, oh, they're coming my way. Let's see. Smell is very primitive. Smell plays a very strong role in memories. It's part of the limbic system. The limbic is this emotional system. We cement things in our mind. You'll learn if you're going into a clinic in any field, whether you're working for a company, whether you're in a hospital, you know what you learn from more than anything else? Your mistakes. You want to make little mistakes because you'll have an emotional response. Oh, shoot. I mean, a med error, you can lose your license. So when you make a tiny mistake, and this is what they do in nursing for your nursing major. You can do 15 things wrong, right, and one thing wrong, they will jump all over you on the one thing wrong. Because they want you to remember that. You're going to cement it. It makes you angry, but it cements it. I won't forget that ever again. It happens to doctors too. It's like I remember my attending orthopedic surgeon reading me a riot act because I didn't call him about a certain problem that I should have known about, even though I had never heard of it before. But you're on the receiving end, and you know what you do when you sit there. Go, yes, thank you for pointing that out. It's exactly, you sit there and go, okay, I'll never let that happen again. I'm so fucking different. Sometimes you got to smile and take it. Gustatory is taste, visceral sensory, just what it is. Okay, and this visual cortex blindness, we don't go into all this. These are these neat areas. Sensation, thoughts, emotions becoming conscious makes us who we are. This is the integration of the emotional system, which you're going to see a construct of called the limbic system, and the rest of your brain. It's the whole idea. Okay, some people can't help but put their emotions over their actions. Other people are very much in control. It's nice to have a certain balance that's associated with all these things. So there's 3 areas. I'm not going to go crazy about them, but this is that first one, that prefrontal cortex. Very complicated. This is kind of makes us who we are. Imagine them taking it out, and all of a sudden you become just basically a functional zombie without, the connotations that are there. So all of these things, and really was a tragedy. And we have them in the back as well, recognizing patterns, understanding. This is what makes us who we are. And the limbic system, you'll see all the structures that are there. The big player for you to remember is the hippocampus. That's about short-term memory, and the first part that really starts to suffer during Alzheimer's. It's a big player. Again, anything that your instructors going forward in your careers that are important to them, you will see on a test. My mom succumbed, like a lot of moms did. After a great run, I thought, driving until she was 86. Could still get Final Jeopardy before I did when she was maybe 88. I'm good. Okay, and then this gives you where the tumors, it'll tell you all the different things, what it'll tell you. And this is the idea of lateralization. I'm the most left brain individual you're going to run into. Okay, so that's lateralization. 90% of us are left-sided dominance, approximately right. I always look when you guys are marking your test to see who's a righty, who's a lefty, just out of curiosity to see how many there are. Just curious, and it's usually around 90 to 10. Okay, usually results in other 10 hemispheres are reversed. Okay, and it doesn't matter. A lot of people overlap. My wife is very creative, but she's right-handed. So, I mean, you can't play with a broad brush. This is me. Language, math, logic. Visual spatial skills, very limited. My kids were beating me in Super Mario when they were 5 and 6. Guys were eating me up on level 1. Okay? Intuition, have little. Emotion, yeah. Artistic and musical skills, very limited. You've seen my handwriting. I draw stick figures. Okay, but they're always in contact with one another. So I think you get the idea about those things that are there. There's a lot of interesting things that kind of go with it. Like my daughter's right-handed. She's pretty good with artistic. So none of my kids were musical. And again, they're all adopted, so there's no genetic ties that I can identify with regard to this thing. But my sister, my mom, my dad, and I were all probably, and my sister's left-handed, but she's very no artistic skills. A lot. One down. 3 to go. But we don't do a lot of the parts intentionally. This is D, C, B. Bingo. Okay, white matter. 3 types of white matter fibers. These are just the pathways to send the signals. You have association, commissural, and projection. Simple. Association, only on one side, back and forth. I just saw that. What did it mean? How do I react to it? Okay. Like you saw, oh, my alarm's going off. I got to shut it down on my phone. That's all on the same side. Commissural, right to left. So yes, despite what people say, most of us, when our right hand does something, our left hand kind of knows what's going on. Okay, and projection is up and down. Simple. Association, horizontal, connect different parts of the same side. Commissural, across. The big commissural one is the corpus callosum. Did you learn about that in anatomy? The big white matter. You cut right through it when you're doing the brain. It's a thick white matter that basically is between right and left. It's major. Projection are up and down. My advanced students, they looked at the corona radiata. That's the thalamus. Radiating crown is what it means. Coronavirus, because it's got a crown, like we talk about that in micro. Why it was called what it was called. And moving them all, basically sifting. Oh, I felt that, it goes here. I saw that, it goes back here. I heard that, it goes over here. It points it to the appropriate thing. Okay. And again, a lot of this thing, and these are some of the, and this is a different one. It's there, but you don't have to get through this. The illustrations are useful. The abundance of white matter, as you can see, versus, okay, in green, commissural. And you'll see a little bit more of those when we get into the spinal cord, but for our purposes now, we're talking about the corpus callosum. That's certainly the answer on the test, if I phrase it that way. And then projection in this sort of this bluish color, purplish color, and you can see in red association. They're on the same side. And those are the ventricles with the fluid. Those are the basal nuclei here. And you can see the gray matter, even though they've drawn it a bit thicker, is external here. Same deal. Corpus callosum, association fibers, projection fibers. That's that. The corona radiata kind of looks, see how it radiates? This sort of looks like a seashell to me, the human brain. You can see a little bit of that in the sheep brain. That's why with my classes, I like to do that, this little bit of teach before I do the sheep brain dissection, just to see if you almost take off the whole top part and just look at the diencephalon and the brainstem. Basal nuclei are basic and basal nuclei. Because they make stripes, we often call them the corpus striatum. That's all you have to know. These are the big players. That's substantia nigra. Remember, that's where neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine are made. Dopamine's only produced there. Norepinephrine is produced there principally and a little bit in the adrenal medulla. We will get to that when we talk about autonomic nervous system, rather. Remember, that's those pathways. One associated with Parkinson's goes to the striatum, it comes from the midbrain and goes to the basal nuclei. The other one goes to the limbic system, and that's the one I was talking a little bit about that has a lot to do with addictive disease. It's got a fancy name. It's called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. You don't have to know, but that's a big player. And so these are the basal nuclei. I'm not going to ask you about any of that, but you can see they're rather substantial. And so you can sometimes, again, it's much easier to discern in a larger brain, but they're very expensive. If we had a human brain, we'd have to, the way I had one was for demonstration. I was doing graduate neuroanatomy chat. For PA candidates and occupational therapy, both master's candidates. So, and again, you can read through this. Big player in Parkinson's and Huntington's disease. And they're both characterized by irregular movement. Huntington's disease, the fancy name that we used to give that, and again, another little, Stein's got a tip for a word that you'll understand. It's called chorea. They call them choreiform, not a K, like the countries of Korea, south and north, but Chorea. So it used to be called Huntington's chorea because we classified it based on that. When people got this affliction back in medieval times, they thought everything was an act of God, or you're invaded by the devil, or you get punishment for something you horribly did. They used to have this irregularity. They had a great name for it. You don't have to know, but I love telling the story. Called St. Vitus's Dance. You think you'd enjoy a little history? You don't have to know that, but I love the story. Diencephalon, thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. Third ventricle, important. Closes the diencephalon. Don't have to see it. This area, thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, or pineal gland. Pineal gland, we know it's associated with body rhythms. I'm a daytime person. Maybe you're not. So I see all you guys yawning, half asleep. But I'm up at 5 o'clock, 5:30 every morning. I'm a morning guy. When you do surgery at times for a living, you generally do surgery like you're at the hospital at 6:30, 7 o'clock. Okay? And you see patients in the afternoon. So you're an early riser. Okay? Nothing unusual about that. Those three main structures are there. Again, the thalamus is the big player. Two egg-like structures. Lots of different names for the nuclei. Don't have to know any of those damn things. Okay, sorts, edits, and relays, and basically is getting information. The hypothalamus is a relationship with, if you're getting information about something you just saw, like stopping that car because some idiot tried to cut you off, part of that is relaying information. The hypothalamus, either from or to, that's basically going to cause a more emotional response. Again, impulses from other areas, and what it does, sorts and edits and sends it. So it mediates, a very good word, sort of interprets and mediates the sensation, not so much consciously as subconsciously, all of those types of things. So it's a really pivotal area. The hypothalamus is the link between your nervous system and your endocrine system. A little tongue-like structure that protrudes called the infundibulum really makes up the posterior aspect of the single most important endocrine gland in your body, called the pituitary. You have posterior and anterior pituitary. They're separate but included as one gland. You go over that in endocrine, very important. And so that's where a lot of those chemicals come from. This is the blood-brain barrier is weakest here. This area, the diencephalon, the blood-brain barrier is distinctly weaker. And this is where we have a lot of sensors. Do we have enough sugar? Do we have enough sodium? Are there irregularities in other chemicals? What's our oxygen level? All of those things get picked up there because the blood-brain barrier is weaker. So the sensors can interpret data that are there. So it's really the basis of homeostasis. Plays a pivotal role in the system we're going to talk about when you come back, the autonomic, all of those neat things. Physical responses to emotion. That's why it's part of this emotional system. And this is where we perceive things. All of that stuff. And sometimes you all know this. It's difficult to keep your emotions under control. Sometimes we can't avoid ourselves like doing that. It's like that whole thing with the Steelers and the guy spat on him. I mean, he's going to get fined, but a little fine. The other guy got a big suspension on top of the fact he denied it to start. The magic of video. But that's unable to control your emotions, both those guys. I understand, football is a bad example because there's more testosterone flowing there in football than any place else. They're just everybody's like that, and a lot of sports like that. That are there, not just men's, but women's sports certainly as well. The hypothalamus also does all of these things. Homeostasis, hunger, thirst, body temperature. This is sodium. All these biological clock plays a role. Okay, and we'll get into all of that, or rather you'll get into all of that. That's AP2. All these things, a lot of disturbances. These are ones that are not so much the obesity and eating disorders that are more psychiatric/psychological. These are ones that are more often having what we call an organic component, where there's a physical reason in the central nervous system. And effectively, what does that mean? You always get the same answers. Infections, tumors, trauma, previous surgical intervention, all of those things, medications. All of these are things that can impact those areas. The pineal or pineal gland, sleep-wake cycle specifically. I mentioned melatonin before. There's a lot of construction to the brainstem. Here, you're looking proportionally. This is thalamus. This is really with that little stalk where we find the pituitary gland. These are important because that's where all the white matter is coming down, even though they depicted it in green, from the brain telling your body to move. This is the midbrain area. The pons, the fibers go transversely. Very easy. You probably saw something like this when you talked about cranial nerves. And this is the medulla oblongata. We're talking about a couple of inches in us. It's a stem. Not big. Same thing here. You have midbrain. These are important in the midbrain. They're called the colliculi. You see them on the back. Did you look at them on the sheet? Not ringing a bell. I'll tell you what they do. See, a couple of people, you're looking at your computers and things like that, looked at me. The minute it's called sight and sound reflexes. It's protective. Superior is when you catch it in the corner of your eye and you turn your head. Sound, inferior. Okay? You heard something, it's like a siren. Where's it coming from? When you're in the car, you wonder, do I have to pull over? Am I in the right lane? Whatever. That kind of stuff. Are they after me? Did I do something bad? Got it? Those are called the colliculi. They also have a fancy name called the corpora quadrigemini of the tectum. But I like saying that. So they're there, but the midbrain's big player is basically we're getting less advanced. There's no cortex here. You just have some islands of gray matter, basically for cranial nerves or for neurotransmitter production. Autonomic means automatic. This is all about homeostasis. 10 of the 12 pairs of the cranial nerves. You've seen this illustration. The only two cranial nerves that are not optic, which goes to the thalamus, and the olfactory, which goes directly into the brain. That's why smelling is so much important. Not worried about that or any of that type of stuff that's there. Basically, there's just talking about the visual and auditory reflex, almost done, and substantia nigra. Let me just show it to you. This guy. So here, those are those big fibers telling your move your arms, move your legs. This is the substantia nigra, black stuff. These are the red nuclei. When you see that amount of pigmentation, that's where neurotransmitters are produced. There's a lot of pigmentation in nervous cells. They do a lot of production of neurotransmitters. Here, this is a big cluster. This is characteristic of the midbrain. So that's really all you have to know. We'll leave it there. I'll finish all of this pons. There's not a whole lot on C. It really talks more about stuff we don't cover, but the meninges are there. And D is the spinal, and I'll get that all out to you on Friday, unless I'm able to come online and you're available. Thank you.